first thing that comes to mind when somebody says Cooperstown is baseball.
I don't think there's any place like it in sports. The name Cooperstown, you know what you're talking about. You know what you mean.
People who hit the ball better than anybody else, the people who pitch better than anyone else.
This is the spiritual heart of the game.
Let's play two.
It's where legends come to live forever. It's the sports mecca.
A small percentage of the best players that ever lived.
The repository of not just all the history of the game, but I think our hopes.
I said I'd be in the Hall of Fame one day, and I'm going in.
Those are cool poppers.
Wow.
Yeah, that's neat.
But look at how the old face masks are even done then, too.
Oh, my word.
As America has grown up, so has the Baseball Hall of Fame.
Here's Connie Mack, and now he's in front of the microphone.
The first induction ceremony on June 12, 1939 puts tingles up your spine.
Not only did you have an induction of the all-time greats,
Well, this is a great day in my life.
but you had the opening of the greatest sports history museum on Earth.
Major League Baseball Productions presents A Hall for Heroes, the inaugural Hall of Fame induction of 1939. Picturesque, quaint, evocative. Any one of those words aptly describes Cooperstown, a place that has retained the charm of a bygone era. But this village has actually grown quite a bit since 1939. And among those lifelong residents who've witnessed that growth firsthand is Catherine Walker.
It's a beautiful town. It was a small, sleepy town with more cows than people. We have grown over the years, and it's a perfect place for a Baseball Hall of Fame to be.
Cooperstown is the genesis of two of our great iconic bits of Americana, the national pastime and cowboys and Indians, James Fenimore Cooper, the Leatherstocking Tales, and baseball.
For one glorious weekend each summer, Cooperstown is the epicenter of the baseball world.
Hey!
Fans and former players come here every year to pay homage to the greats of the game.
There are just thousands and thousands and thousands of people that can't wait to go to Cooperstown to recognize their star players.
Baseball is, of course, the draw, but so too is the town itself.
It's a wonderful place. It's a beautiful little town on a beautiful lake.
When you look at a map of New York State and see where Cooperstown is, nestled between the Catskills and the Adirondacks, your mind wanders back to perhaps the 19th or even the late 18th century, and you imagine stickball games and baseball games and say, hey, this is a place the Hall of Fame should be.
And as they have since 1939, thousands of fans filled the streets once again in 2010 to witness that induction, headlined by the Hawk. Andre Dawson compiled those Hall of Fame credentials during his 21 years in the major leagues.
Look out. Folks, when this comes down, it might be in a different time zone.
And prior to his induction, the Hawk, as is now custom, got a behind-the-scenes tour of his new home.
You would like to see where your plaque's going to be?
Sure.
Okay. You, Harvey, and Herzog will be the first one then starting that alcove.
Okay.
Okay, I think we should go downstairs and check out some of the archives. You want to go see your stuff down in the basement?
Sure.
All right.
I can't wear that now.
What's it feel like, Andre?
When I stepped into the plaque gallery, I kind of got goosebumps.
Andre also reached out to touch a cherished piece of baseball's past.
This is a jersey worn by Lou Gehrig in his final season in '39, and you can tell because of the patch, the baseball centennial patch.
The '39 Gehrig jersey has a special significance in these halls, since '39 also marked the dedication of the Hall of Fame.
In 1939, when players like Jimmy Fox were observing baseball's 100th anniversary, the first group was inducted.
This was a glorious, glorious day in June 12, 1939.
It was a singular and unforgettable event. But why Cooperstown? How did this sleepy little village come to be known as the place where baseball was invented in 1839 and eventually become a shrine to the game's greats? Well, it all began with a man who won more than 250 big league games. A sporting goods tycoon, and as it turns out, a creator of myths named Albert G. Spalding. With the opening of the National Baseball Hall of Fame in 1939, Cooperstown became the home of baseball history. But was it also the home of the game itself? In 1905, A.G. Spalding set out to prove that baseball was indeed of American origin. His counterpoint in this debate actually worked for him.
Henry Chadwick was an immigrant from England. He was really America's first sports writer. He fell in love with the game of baseball and began covering it. He was the guy who invented the box score. Chadwick also became editor for Spalding's Baseball Guide. In the guide, Chadwick wrote something to the effect that, well, you know, baseball's a wonderful game, too bad it's not American. He's basically saying that baseball came from town ball, which was a game played after town meetings in America, and that town ball was a derivative of rounders, game in England.
So, in 1905, Spalding created the Mills Commission, whose mission was to prove Chadwick wrong. But Spalding didn't exactly play fair.
When Spalding decided to finally put together a commission to get to the bottom of this mystery of where did baseball come from, he didn't invite the people who were of the Rounders camp. He had actually done some pre-screening of the commission, and the people on there were the ones who were already predisposed to the idea that baseball was going to have an American, quote-unquote, dad.
Still, the commission found no hard evidence to support Spalding's claim. And then, a man named Abner Graves told a story about a Civil War hero in a remote part of New York State inventing a new game.
Graves had been raised as a young kid in Cooperstown, New York. He said that he remembered that a man by the name of Abner Doubleday had sketched a diamond in the dirt, put down the rules for baseball as we play it today.
Now the batter is on the offensive and wants to capture each one of your bases.
The Graves story just fell into their lap, with Abner Doubleday being a well-known Army general. How better could it be than to have Doubleday be the inventor of the game, because he was that hero, and not only that, he was dead, so he couldn't refute it.
But not all the claims presented by Graves added up.
He said that they were boyhood friends. Not really true. Graves was about 4 years old when this took place, and Doubleday was about 19. Also, there's the question of what year did it come out. He said he remembered it was during the Harrison campaign. They concluded that it must have been 1839, and so that was the date that was picked. And then they asked, well, where exactly in Cooperstown? And he named about 3 different locations, one of which was called the Finney Field, and that's where Doubleday Field is located today. So that was the evidence up to that time, and that starts what's known as the Doubleday myth, that baseball was invented in Cooperstown, New York, in 1839.
But I tell you, Graves, I know it will be a good game.
So Spalding now had the Doubleday myth, but he still needed Mills and his commission to legitimize it. And it wasn't long until Mills himself took pen in hand.
Finally, A.G. Mills, just one of the members of the commission, did in fact respond, and it's his words that are now known today. According to what you've told me, as best as we can tell, baseball was invented in Cooperstown in 1839.
Abner Doubleday gets more credit than he deserves because of this Mills Commission that comes out in 1908 in the Spalding Baseball Guide that says Doubleday's the man. He's the guy who did it.
No one truly believes the Doubleday myth anymore, but every good story needs an opening chapter, and this one fits.
Even though the myth of Abner Doubleday has been exposed as just that, it doesn't mean that it's not an important part of baseball history. You can't have Christmas without Santa Claus. You can't have Easter without the Easter Bunny. Myth is a very important part of any form of history and should be understood for what it is.
You know, myths tell us in some ways more about a culture and a people than the actual fact of things. Albert Goodwill Spalding, emphasis on the middle name, decided to perpetuate this preposterous myth that Abner Doubleday invented baseball in Cooperstown, New York. But we all bought into it, and what we bought into was a dream of an idyllic pastoral beginnings to the most perfect game there ever is, baseball.
Having decided, mythically or otherwise, that Cooperstown was indeed the home of baseball, the village proudly embraced its newfound fame. and one Cooperstown resident sought to capitalize on the town's distinction.
Stephen Clark was one of Cooperstown's leading citizens. In the 1930s, he was looking for ways for Cooperstown to thrive, and he developed art museums and history museums that are still housed in Cooperstown today.
But the best idea for a museum in Cooperstown came from one of his employees, Scotsman Alexander Cleland.
Alexander Cleland, being a creative thinker, sketched ideas down about how he would propose a museum in Cooperstown for baseball.
Cleland pitched the idea to Clark, and Stephen caught it. The next step was to seek the help of someone who could spread the word.
One of the most important things he did was get in touch with the new president of the National League, Ford Frick. He was a former sports writer, and he was able to help Cleland get the word out that a new baseball museum was being started.
But Frick then came up with an idea that would really put this museum on the map.
He thought maybe it should be more than just a museum, that perhaps we should think about electing people to this and calling it a Hall of Fame.
The concept was put into action, and while the building was being assembled, so was the first roster of inductees.
The first Hall of Fame election occurred in 1936, and it was actually two separate elections. The first election was conducted by the baseball writers, and they were to vote on those players post-1900. There was a separate election that was held by a veterans committee made up of quote-unquote old-timers, and they were to vote on players prior to 1900.
It seemed simple enough, but the first vote didn't go very smoothly.
Back then, people were told to vote with almost no instruction. They weren't told whether players had to be retired or whether they had to be active. They were not instructed on terms of players whose careers split both the 19th and the 20th centuries.
Eventually, the voters made their decision and successfully elected the first ever Hall of Fame class. And the 5 men who received 75% of the vote were indeed at the head of the class.
Christy Mathewson was a gentleman. He was the first sports icon in America.
He was and still is one of the game's all-time great pitchers. His 373 victories are tied for 3rd all-time, and his performance in the 1905 World Series was stunning.
He pitched 3 games, won 3 games, and all of them were by shutouts.
Mathewson garnered 90% of the vote. Unfortunately, he had passed away years prior to the induction, but those who saw him pitch never forgot the exploits of the man they called the Christian gentleman.
He was one of the most beloved baseball players of all time.
If Mathewson set a standard for pitching greatness, the next inductee kept it right on track.
Walter Johnson, the durable big train, pitched 21 years for the same team, the Washington Senators.
The Big Train had 417 wins for the Washington Senators during his time of play. That is second all-time, only to Cy Young's 511.
The great Walter Johnson of the Washington Senators set many pitching records.
He also has the career record with 110 shutouts, which is truly amazing.
He was also the first man ever to reach 3,000 strikeouts. But despite those achievements, Johnson only received 83% of the vote, lowest among the original 5. Surprising, since many still regard him as the best pitcher ever.
Walter Johnson, the name means speed, power, control.
They called the next inductee the Flying Dutchman. He was also often referred to as baseball's greatest shortstop, a title many feel he still holds today.
Honus Wagner was the whole package. He was the 5-tool player. He was the Willie Mays at shortstop.
Wagner won 8 batting titles, and he batted 300 or over for 17 straight years.
Wagner drove in more than 1,700 runs in his career, and he stole more than 700 bases. He earned 95% of the Hall of Fame vote, second highest among the 5 charter members.
This guy was quite a ball player. Nobody ever played the game better than Honus Wagner.
How revered was Wagner? Well, consider that his percentage of the vote was equal to the next inductee, a man who simply revolutionized the game.
The greatest home run hitter of all time, Babe Ruth, was a magical name.
We are talking about an era when major league leaders in home runs might be 13, 14, 15. Ruth out-homered most of the teams in the American League.
There it is. It's going, going.
Babe Ruth invented modern baseball. And I think that's why he is the great sports icon that he is today.
714 times he made this familiar trot around the bases.
The honor of being part of the first class at Cooperstown was really important to him, a nice credential for him to carry around.
The greatest idol in American sports, the Bambino, Babe Ruth.
But as great as Ruth was, the final inductee in this first class was considered to be Hall of Fame worthy by even more of the voters.
By Cobb, rated by many baseball authorities as the greatest player of all.
Cobb was a unique player and probably is as well known for how fierce he was and unrelenting he was as a hitter.
This cocky, confident attitude was typical of Ty. Cobb thought he could do anything.
His career batting average of .367 is still the highest ever. He has 12 batting titles. He had 23 straight seasons batting over 300. All those things are records.
He was baseball's greatest hitter.
With 98% of the vote, Cobb eclipsed the other inductees. And when that final vote was tallied, he finished just 4 votes shy of being unanimous.
Cobb got the most votes, 222 among the 5 of them. He beat out Babe Ruth. And that's how he was regarded by people who saw him play.
Cobb and Ruth were polar opposites, but though they exemplified different baseball styles, their greatness was beyond dispute. Thus, it was only appropriate that they led this first Hall of Fame class.
What they started, though, is a tradition that has meaning now and has woven itself into the spirit of the game itself. That's an amazing thing.
Looking back at the Hall of Fame's first class of 1936, you might be surprised by a name that's missing, but there was a reason.
The reason Cy Young wasn't elected in the first class to the Hall of Fame was a consequence of the selection rules.
He understood that he overlapped 1900, that he was almost as much a 19th century ball player as he was a 20th century ball player. Certainly a guy with the most wins had to be a little upset that he wasn't with the original class.
But Denton True Young only had to wait a year before he garnered the necessary votes.
Being inducted into the Hall of Fame meant a great deal for Cy Young's life. It was a kind of credentialing of him, and as a consequence of becoming an immortal.
Joining Young in the class of 37 were Nap Lajoie and Tris Speaker.
Mathewson and Young were the last of the 19th century pitchers. Speaker was the last of the 19th century outfielders. He played the style that everybody played before 1900.
Speaker might have been the extreme case, the guy who played the shallowest even among all his colleagues in that era. 450 career assists from the outfield. 450.
As for Nap, well, he was the first ever American League Triple Crown winner back in 1901. The original plan was to have Hall of Fame elections every year. In 1938, only one man received the honor from the writers.
Alexander was an absolutely fantastic pitcher. At one point, 1915, 16, and 17, he won 30 or more games each season.
If you look at those first 4 pitchers elected, it's not surprising that those are the first 4 people in terms of most wins all time in the history of the major leagues.
In 1939, the Scribes brought 3 more into the fold: George Sisler, Willie Keeler, and Eddie Collins. Collins was a career .333 hitter, a driving force on 4 championship teams, and a brilliant baseball mind to boot.
The most impressive thing about Eddie Collins' playing career was his consistency. Not only was he a top baseball hitter, he was on base frequently. He would take the extra base. Eddie Collins' overall reaction was one of awe that he would become part of this group of ball players that he had either played with or admired for so long.
Willie Keeler's perhaps most famous for one of the phrases that he uttered as a player, and that was, "I hit 'em where they ain't." His career .345 average is also one of the highest all time, and he had 7 seasons in which he batted over .350.
George Sisler was one of the top 2 or 3 players in all of baseball in the very early 1920s. George Sisler's reaction to his induction into the Hall of Fame was kind of interesting. He was a part owner of a sporting goods store in St. Louis. He was at the store stocking ice skates when he learned of the news, and he was obviously very excited.
As the list of Hall of Famers grew, Cleveland continued to gather artifacts from each era. including one that will never be matched.
Cy Young was very responsible here for being one of the first to come forward with some piece of memorabilia, his baseball from his 500th win.
Young also donated a painting of himself that had been done by Abbott Thayer of New Hampshire. Other players, too, began to come forward with their own mementos.
When they found out what was going on, everybody was very willing to donate something.
Lajoie followed suit soon after, and in fact, the next year, when Ty Cobb found out that these players had donated these items, he quickly donated an entire uniform.
The Hall of Fame's collection continued to grow, and people throughout the nation began to take notice, thanks in part to some help from the U.S. government.
As time went on, the ball really gets rolling here and picks up steam, and what started out as a little museum in Cooperstown, New York was pretty soon becoming, oh my, this grand scheme, and the whole country was finding out about it.
Prior to 1939, there had never been an American stamp dedicated to any sports figure or sporting event, and so it was big news when the Postmaster General announced in February of that year that there would be a special baseball centennial stamp. This stamp had first been proposed in 1937 by the Cooperstown Chamber of Commerce, quickly supported by the local stamp club, and then endorsed by Ford Frick at the National League office and forwarded on to the Postmaster General.
Having come this far, one major decision remained.
Well, naturally, the question is, what's going to be on the stamp? Shouldn't it be a picture of someone? How about the guy who invented the game, Abner Doubleday? Oh dear, there was a man by the name of Cartwright, Alexander Cartwright, who his family said was really responsible for originating the game. And so what they picked was sort of a generic scene of baseball being played by young boys.
With a stamp of approval from the government, an ever-growing collection of artifacts, and 4 classes of Hall of Famers waiting for a place to call home, the road was now paved for the first induction ceremony in 1939.
From Cooperstown, New York, the National Broadcasting Company brings you the baseball centennial ceremonies, which officially dedicate the National Baseball Museum and the Baseball Hall of Fame.
It was called the Cavalcade of Baseball on June 12, 1939. They had stopped running a train there to Cooperstown, but for this occasion, they cut down the weeds between the tracks there, and they brought a new train in. Oh, how would you have loved to have been on this train?
The train came from New York City. It was called the Cooperstown Special, and it featured 8 Pullman cars and had the greatest players in baseball history on it. Not only the Hall of Famers that were getting inducted, but also the active players were coming in, as well as baseball dignitaries like the commissioner and the presidents of the league.
I remember the guys walked down from the train, and my brother carried Babe Ruth's suitcase down Main Street, and the children followed him like the Pied Piper of Hamelin. He just attracted the children.
The village was abuzz with excitement, and as part of the festivities, the Postmaster General unveiled the Cavalcade of Baseball stamp commemorating the 100th anniversary of the game.
This was the first day issue for the stamps, and everybody wanted to get one. James Farley, the Postmaster General, was there, and he was issuing the first stamp to Commissioner Landis.
Commissioner Landis turned around and donated that to the Baseball Museum, which was right across the street.
This is baseball's National Museum, where the gloves, bats, uniforms, and other treasured trophies of famous players will be preserved along with their records.
For the first time, we're saying that the history of the game means something, that we can begin to enshrine and codify not just the importance of the game specifically, but of individuals that we care about.
The picturesque village of Cooperstown stands by to hear the words of the immortals of baseball.
I think it was a little bit of a shock how big this thing went over.
A huge success, 5 years after Stephen Clark and Alexander Cleland had put the plan in motion.
Probably some 15,000 visitors lined the streets here in Cooperstown. And what really tied everything together beautifully was that baseball, first and foremost, recognized this as a celebration of their game.
And as baseball fans flooded the normally sleepy streets of Cooperstown, the rest of the nation listened in.
Thousands of persons have come from the 4 corners of this country to be here today to rub elbows with these immortals of baseball.
The first induction was incredibly special. You had 11 living inductees, 25 overall Hall of Famers, constituting 4 classes, 1936, 37, 38, and 39.
4 classes representing the greatest collection of baseball talent ever assembled.
You look at that group of players and it puts tingles up your spine. When you look back at that conglomeration of the first 4 classes together, which is something, of course, that is very unique and you really never see again, it's one of those things that really shows you who the greatest icons in the game truly were.
I mean, you were really looking at the original immortals there that day, and that must have been something really special.
As the crowd swelled, the immortals gathered for a photo that has become almost as legendary as the players who were in it. Pictured were 10 of the 11 living inductees. The only one missing was Ty Cobb, and there was plenty of speculation regarding his absence.
Reports vary. He, at various times, said he was sick. He had contacted ptomaine poisoning in nearby Utica on his way to Cooperstown, was hospitalized and arrived late. Other reports say he was on his way but couldn't get in. Nobody recognized him as he was arriving, so he had trouble getting into the ceremony.
Cobb missed the photo op but arrived in time to join his contemporaries for the dedication by Commissioner Landis.
To the 13 pioneers who were the moving spirits of the game in its infancy, and to the 12 players who've been nominated to the Hall of Fame by the Baseball Writers Association, we pay tribute, just tribute. And I think all these immortals of baseball would agree with me to dedicate this museum to all Americans, to lovers of good sportsmanship, healthy body, keen mind, for those are the principles of baseball.
Following the ribbon-cutting ceremony, the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum was declared officially open.
So there is the Pantheon. There's our Olympus. There are our gods, the immortals of baseball, who do actually enjoy a kind of immortality.
But before they were welcomed into that most exclusive fraternity, one of the non-player inductees, the venerable Connie Mack, was the first to address the crowd.
I feel greatly honored in being here today with the other great stars of baseball and with all of those who have taken part in promoting the interest of baseball. And I am quite positive that in the years to come that we can look forward to our game still progressing.
One by one, the Hall of Famers took to the microphone.
The great Ty Cobb.
Well, this is a great day in my life. I'm very happy to be here, and I feel greatly honored, the privilege of being here.
Throughout the speeches, there was a distinct sense of just how humbled and honored these men were to be so recognized.
I'm not going to take up a great deal of time. Connie Mack really made a speech for all of us. I'm very happy indeed to have been chosen by the sports writers as a member of this great Hall of Fame. Our time is very limited, so I'm going to thank you again and let someone else come on. Thank you.
When Cy Young gave his short speech, he made essentially 3 points. That he was glad to be there, that he was glad baseball was prospering, and that he hoped and expected that it would continue to be an important game for the next 100 years.
I'm glad to be here today in honor of this statuary, this Hall of Fame. Glad that I was able to go through 22-odd years and do what I did and to have my name on the record.
The last man to speak was also the most celebrated.
He was the most recognizable guy of anybody. And, of course, he stands up and the crowd goes crazy.
Babe Ruth, the Bambino!
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I know the old boys back in there. We were just talking it over. Some have been here long before my time. They got on it, and I worked hard, and I got on it. And I hope that the coming generation, the young boys today, that they'll work hard and also be on it. And as my old friend Cy Young says, I hope it goes another 100 years, and the next 100 years will be the greatest. And I'm surely glad, and it's a pleasure for me to come up here and be picked also on the Hall of Fame. Thank you.
The speeches had concluded, but there'd be plenty more to celebrate on this unforgettable June day in 1939. It was June 12, 1939, as the National Baseball Hall of Fame welcomed its first inductees.
It's a pleasure for me to come up here and be picked also on the Hall of Fame. Thank you.
But the day didn't end with speeches and plaques. A celebration was in order for the game itself. a game that had captivated so much of America. And Cooperstown came up big with a truly festive parade.
The parade started around 2:30 in the afternoon after the induction ceremony. Started at the Hall of Fame and went 4 blocks down to Doubleday Field. There was 5 marching bands. The streets were draped with bunting and flags. It was a joyous occasion where the fans could practically touch the greatest players they had ever heard of.
The ball players, of course, leading the way to Doubleday Field because you had to have a baseball game to go along with the ceremony.
Players took the field and fans filled the seats. Fresh off a makeover, Doubleday Field sparkled with stars on every corner of the diamond. You couldn't have asked for a better setting to play ball.
Doubleday Field had been revamped. It was not really in Major League playing condition before the 1939 celebration.
And this one goes into the stands for a home run.
And so they brought a guy named Henry Fabian. He was a groundskeeper for the New York Giants. And he saw what was here. He said, well, you got a skinned infield. There's no grass anywhere there. And he didn't like that. And you don't have an outfield wall. You need some bleachers. So he pretty much laid things out and said, this is the way it should be. So they made Doubleday Field into something that was quite professional.
The ballpark was packed, and both Hall of Famers and current players were divided into teams. Honorary captains Hannes Wagner and Eddie Collins chose sides, and they did it the old-fashioned way. Folks were having so much fun that what began as a 3-inning game continued for 7. Many big names took their cuts that day, but the crowd's biggest thrill had to be seeing Babe Ruth, just 4 years removed from his playing days.
They were teasing Babe, you know. He said, can you still hit, Babe? He said, I couldn't hit the floor with my hat. That's what he said. He popped one up, and when he did, everybody was saying, drop it, you know, like that. They didn't want Babe to be out. It was just a great experience.
Doubleday Field went on to host other exhibition games throughout the summer of '39. It was all part of the Centennial Commission's Cavalcade of Baseball celebration.
In July, we had Connie Mack Day here in Cooperstown, where the Philadelphia Athletics came north and played against the Pennsylvania Athletic Club. Then in August, we have the New York Yankees, the world champion New York Yankees, coming to town to play their farm club, the Newark Bears, in front of 10,000 people at Doubleday Field. Hard-fought game. The Newark Bears beat the New York Yankees 5-4, despite the play on the field of 3 future Yankee Hall of Famers, Joe DiMaggio, Joe Gordon, and Bill Dickey.
With the cleat marks of countless Hall of Famers embedded in its turf, Doubleday Field, a jewel in the center of Cooperstown, has emerged as a distinctive baseball destination. They built it, and the people came. And to this day, they still do. Sometimes history books can only tell us so much, like the first Hall of Fame induction ceremony in 1939. We know where it was, we know why it took place, and who was on hand. But now, more than 70 years later, only a handful of people can say they were actually there. Catherine Walker, an attendant at the Hall of Fame Museum, was one of them.
The 13 pioneers who were the moving spirits of the game.
I was 8 years old then. I remember standing on my daddy's shoulders on the post office steps right across from the viewing stand where the inductees came, and it was packed. You could look out and see the sea of faces. It was beautiful.
Another face in the crowd that day was Cooperstown resident Homer Osterhout.
People in town were pretty excited, especially with all the big-name players coming. It was quite an occasion.
Homer had more reason than most to be proud that June day, because he had had a hand in building the structure where the Hall of Famers would be immortalized.
Well, I was really 19 when I got a job working for Bedford Company, who had the contract to do the Hall of Fame construction. We mixed cement for the foundation and then gradually built a wall. It was quite exciting.
But Homer's connection to the Hall of Fame and the day's events went beyond just brick and mortar. You see, Homer did something few thought to do. He captured the day on film, beginning with the moment the VIPs began to arrive.
I was up there when they got off the train. I took some pictures of them.
Homer's candid photographs, beautiful in their simplicity, speak volumes about the majesty of the day.
That's Connie Mack, shortly after he got off the train. Now, this is Hannes Wagner after he got off the train, and he signed an autograph for a youngster. Now, Hank Greenberg walking down Main Street. He was with some of the local young people.
And I think all these immortals of baseball would agree with me to dedicate this museum to all Americans.
As the ceremony began and the honored guests delivered their acceptance speeches, Homer continued to snap away.
That's Babe Ruth when he was talking. The Cy Young in the white suit. This is Walter Johnson. After the ceremony was over, he's signing autographs for the fans that were in front of the bandstand.
Some of Homer's best shots were taken once the players were in uniform and on their way to Doubleday Field.
That was a picture of Babe Ruth and his bodyguard, somebody close to him anyway. That was taken in the parking lot by Doubleday Field. This is Dizzy Dean tying up his shoes after he came from the gymnasium, sitting on Main Street on the grass, getting ready for the ball game later on. Archie Vaughan looks like he's smoking a cigarette. He was sitting there just after he dressed for the Hall of Fame game.
Homer recalls that on the field, fans were soon ushered away from the grass and into the stands. But luckily for us, no one asked Homer to leave the territory he'd staked out at the edge of the diamond.
During the game, this is about the spot where I was. It was different. I mean, nowadays, getting close to any of the Hall of Famers or any big players, it's a lot different. But then, you could go up and talk to them, see what's going on. So out here on the mound was Dizzy Dean pitching. I thought it was interesting to be behind the catcher and have Dizzy Dean pitching. I thought it was quite a neat way to take that picture. That's Babe Ruth up at bat, hitting. Of course, his playing days, regular playing days were over, but he didn't get on base, but at least, he was swinging. Took a picture of him.
The images are so vivid, it's hard to believe they were taken so long ago.
It's still the same feel. I can imagine, the players hitting and running around on the field. Yeah, it seemed like it was just yesterday. Quite a thing for a small town to have these dignitaries come, and it was real special to me that to be there. It was quite a day.
Well, by now we know that the first Hall of Fame induction took place in New York State in 1939. And we also know that Abner Doubleday didn't really invent baseball in Cooperstown, or anywhere else for that matter.
The village of Cooperstown was not the location where baseball was invented. Not only did Doubleday not invent baseball, but Doubleday Field was not the place he didn't invent it.
But there is no dispute that Stephen Clark was indeed the founder of the Hall of Fame. He thought it would bring tourists to his tiny town, and did it ever.
My grandfather loved Cooperstown. He founded the National Baseball Hall of Fame and set out to make sure that the potential was always realized.
Today in Cooperstown, home of baseball, we gather in reverence to baseball's immortal.
No other sports Hall of Fame comes close to the one in Cooperstown. It may not be where baseball started, but it is where the game lives on forever.
I think that it's been generally accepted by the baseball world as being baseball's hometown. But I think it's all part and parcel of that emotional, spiritual strength of the game that maybe some of the sports don't have. You come to this village and there is this old-time charm about it that still exists.
There's no doubting the charm of Cooperstown, but who could have imagined that this tiny village would become so iconic?
I don't think anybody from the Major League offices on down to the local stamp club realized what Cooperstown would grow into meaning for most Americans.
It sort of represents, in its small quaintness, the way the game started.
The beauty of the town, the hotel, the shops on Main Street all remain part of its charm and part of baseball lore and baseball history.
Cooperstown and the Hall of Fame, almost both have exactly the same mission.
Cooperstown and the Baseball Hall of Fame meld into one, and they're not. The village is a separate entity from the museum, and yet people think of it as one experience. To the visitor's mind, there is no edge between the village, which is a beautiful, almost Norman Rockwellian experience, and the museum, where we talk about baseball history and how important baseball is to American culture.
In a sense, today's Hall of Fame is a 21st century destination, but it's also careful to never stray too far from the game's storied past.
The picturesque village of Cooperstown stands by to hear the words of the immortals of baseball.
Over 7 decades, the tone and content of the acceptance speeches has varied.
It's a pleasure for me to come up here and be picked also on the Hall of Fame. Thank you.
In 1939, brevity must have been king. The length of those speeches combined wouldn't fill a 2-minute commercial break today on television.
I feel greatly honored in being here today.
Very happy to be here.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert Freeman Alexander.
But now, really important moments take place at those speeches. You think about Ted Williams, and what does he choose to talk about? Where are all the Negro League players?
And I hope that someday the names of Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson in some way can be added as a symbol of the great Negro players that are not here only because they were not given a chance.
Within 6 years of Ted's speech, both Paige and Gibson were enshrined in Cooperstown.
What's happened is that those speeches have evolved to something intensely personal, people's memories and feelings, the sense that they belong to a great continuum of baseball players.
My father lived and died for baseball.
Let's play two.
Yogi Berra, Whitey Ford, to be in the same family with guys like that, it's a dream come true.
I could have never envisioned myself standing next to my childhood idols, Juan Marichal and Willie Mays.
God bless all of you, and God bless this wonderful game that they call baseball. Thank you very much. That's going down as the greatest speech in the history of the Hall of Fame.
And I think that you just wouldn't have had that opportunity to think about it over the long haul that very first day, June 12th, 1939.
The game that was played at Doubleday Field following the inaugural induction featured some of that era's biggest stars, and the tradition has been revived with the annual Legends Game. What a moment it was in 2009 when 90-year-old Hall of Famer Bob Feller took to the mound. Rapid Robert is a frequent Cooperstown visitor, and he's certainly not alone. More than 300,000 fans make the journey to the Hall of Fame each year, nearly 15 million since 1939. And of course, with each passing season, the very best to play the game also come to Cooperstown.
This is the dream fulfilled right here.
And they never leave.
You know, when you see an individual out there having fun like that, you want to have fun like that yourself. So, one of my heroes.
There are our gods. And each year, we've seen fit to add to that pantheon, to add to the number of gods, the immortals of baseball. That, to me, is a wonderful, wonderful moment. You go to Cooperstown, and you see who the gods are.
I'm Bob Costas. Thanks for watching The Hall of Heroes.